11 months. That is all Brian Rolapp needed to bend golf around himself. His new rules announcement dropped in June, and the shockwave still hasn't settled. The USGA now moves like an institution in panic. Top players are demanding answers. Nobody in charge will explain why. Look at July 15th first. At Royal Birkdale, the R&A admitted it is revisiting equipment rules it once called settled. The reason offered up, a shift inside the PGA Tour. 12 days before that, anger broke cover at the U.S. Senior Open. An unnamed champion dismissed the 90-player safety net as a joke. Stuart Sink warned that an entire class of professionals is sliding toward AA wages. Everything traces back to June 23rd in Cromwell. Rolapp split the sport into two tiers, then collected the commissioner's title on his way off the stage. 6 days before that, golf's own rule makers had already blinked. Sequence tells the story. Resistance died first. The takeover followed within a week. Subscribe if you would rather have documented evidence than another polished press release. One document explains all of it. The page is dated June 17th, 2026. It went out from Shinnecock Hills one day before the U.S. Open began, and it carried 4 signatures where a distance statement had never carried more than 2. The USGA signed it. So did the R&A. Underneath them sat the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, appearing on a document about equipment regulation for the first time in the sport's modern history. That detail alone should have triggered questions. Rulemakers do not normally invite the organizations they regulate to co-author the regulation. Yet almost every headline that afternoon focused on a delay because the statement pushed the golf ball rollback to a single implementation date of January 2030, and everyone reached for the obvious angle. Look past the date. 3 findings were listed inside that text, drawn from conversations between the governing bodies, PGA Tour leadership, the Tour's Player Advisory Council, and DP World Tour officials. The first acknowledged that distance keeps climbing at the elite level. Third on the list came a collective willingness to reconsider approaches previously abandoned. Sandwiched between them, in language dry enough to hide in plain sight, was the admission that changes everything. A concern held by the tours that the updated testing approach may not achieve the desired results. Sit with that phrasing for a moment. Golf's governing bodies had spent roughly 8 years building a case against distance. They published a solution in December 2023, raising the swing speed at which balls are tested from 120 miles per hour to 125, while holding the limit at 317 yards. Projections attached to that change promised 13 to 15 fewer yards from the longest hitters, 9 to 11 from average professionals, and barely 5 for the recreational golfer who swings around 93. A phased rollout was scheduled, hitting elite competition in 2028 before reaching everyone else 2 years later. All of it now sits in review, and the governing bodies put their own names to the doubt. Mike Wan, who runs the USGA, spoke at Shinnecock hours after the release landed. He characterized the ball adjustment as a small, digestible bite the industry could handle, which is a remarkable thing for a chief executive to say about the centerpiece of his own reform program. Wan also volunteered a second piece of history that had never been aired publicly. Roughly 3 years earlier, he explained, the governing bodies had been told point blank that distance-related model local rules would not be implemented at PGA Tour level. Continuing down that road became, in his phrasing, a paper exercise, so they abandoned it. Read that carefully because it reframes the entire rollback saga. The USGA and R&A never lost faith in a separate competition ball. They simply concluded that nobody would agree to use one. The universal rollback that followed was not their preferred answer. It was the only one the tour would tolerate. Then a golf ball humiliated the whole project. Cameron Young put a Titleist Pro V1X double dot into his bag at the 2025 Wyndham Championship, where he won for the first time on the PGA Tour. He liked the flight. Spin control into greens sealed the decision. Nobody, including Young, was thinking about regulatory thresholds. He learned only weeks before the 2026 PGA Championship that multiple sources believed his ball would very likely conform to the new standard, a ball never designed with that standard in mind. Titleist has offered no comment on its status. The USGA declined to comment as well. Here is the part that stung. Young's driving average before the switch and his average through 2026 are effectively identical. In March at TPC Sawgrass, he closed out the Players' Championship by launching a drive of 375 yards on the 72nd hole, the longest ever recorded there in the ShotLink era. A rules framework built to strip 13 to 15 yards from men like him had, by every visible measure, stripped nothing at all. Adam Scott reported losing about 2 yards while testing something similar. Around half a dozen professionals had quietly been playing that ball since the previous autumn. Young's own explanation cut deeper than any lobbying campaign could have. "Players are all sacrificing something already," he said, trading raw yardage for wedge control and predictable spin. Distance was never the only variable being optimized, which means a rule targeting distance alone was aiming at the wrong problem from the start. That is the document, and that is why it matters. 6 days after it published, the man who had quietly reshaped the balance of power walked onto a stage in Connecticut. Cromwell, June 23rd. Brian Rolapp appeared at TPC River Highlands ahead of the Travelers Championship, carrying decisions the Policy Board and the Enterprises Board had ratified in West Hartford the previous day. The recommendations came from a future competition committee, chaired by Tiger Woods, staffed by 5 additional players, and advised by Joe Gorder, John Henry, and Theo Epstein. What emerged was the most severe structural change the Tour has attempted since its formation. Beginning in 2028, professional golf under this banner splits into a championship series and a challenger series running concurrently through the calendar. Roughly 23 to 24 events populate the upper tier, spanning February through August, folding in the 4 majors, the Players, the annual team event, and the Olympics when the cycle allows. Purses there start at $20 million. Fields hold about 120 competitors with no alternate list whatsoever, no sponsor invitations, and a 36-hole cut to the top 65 in ties. 10 of an expected 15 regular season events are already secured, with Boston, Denver, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, all under evaluation for the remainder. Below it sits the Challenger Series. At least 20 tournaments, fields of roughly 144, purses beginning at $4 million, played on venues that have historically hosted tour golf. 7 or so of those events land during Championship Series off weeks. Members of the upper tier are forbidden from entering them. The mechanism binding the two together is where the anger lives. Approximately 130 players will hold Championship Series membership. 90 of them retain full exemption at season's end. Everyone beneath that line risks dropping into the Challenger Series. Coming the other direction, a minimum of 20 players earn promotion each year, with immediate elevation available to anyone who wins multiple Challenger events in a season or captures a major. A last-chance series of 4 to 6 autumn tournaments offers a final route. Q School survives, and each series operates its own points system. Rolapp collected something else that Tuesday. The boards approved him as the 5th commissioner in Tour history effective January 1st, 2027, succeeding Jay Monahan and following Joe Day, Dean Beeman, and Tim Fincham into the role. He keeps the chief executive title as well. A man hired from the NFL in June 2025 had, inside 11 months, restructured the competition and absorbed the authority governing it. Now do the arithmetic that senior professionals were doing within days. Around 230 players currently share this ecosystem, and Rolapp has stated that figure holds in 2028 across an identical count of 47 events. Nothing about the head count is shrinking. What shrinks is the money attached to being one of them. A player finishing 91st has not lost his career, but he has lost access to $20 million purses, and the gap between the tiers runs 5-1. Stuart Sink, 53 years old and enjoying a superb season on the senior circuit, laid it out at the U.S. Senior Open in Columbus. Golf had been shrinking its fields. He argued at precisely the moment the talent pool exploded. His comparison was blunt. The sport used to operate a major league and a AAA level beneath it. From 2028, there will be 3 rungs, since the Korn Ferry Tour continues to exist underneath the Challenger Series. Professionals outside the top rung, Sink concluded, are taking a substantial pay cut. An unnamed past champion at that same event went further, arguing that 90 protected cards demands too little. Retaining status ought to require genuine excellence in his view, and 60 would be the honest number. His verdict on the current threshold was that it amounts to a joke. Steve Flesh raised a different worry entirely. Half the tour, he suggested, has been made to look like the minor leagues, and he questioned whether $20 million purses can be sustained across 24 weeks in perpetuity. Rolapp anticipated this attack. Rory McIlroy had dismissed the lower tier as a glorified Corn Ferry Tour, and the chief executive answered directly at Cromwell. Challenger events will occupy venues fans recognize, he argued, offering healthy purses to a subset of the same players competing today, which separates them from the current developmental circuit. McIlroy later called the model a positive step. Not every voice turned hostile, which is worth stating plainly. Ryan Armour, a former policy board member and a long-standing critic of the signature event structure, called himself cautiously optimistic. His maths pointed the other way. 120 spots plus 144 spots equals 264 weekly opportunities above $4 million, more than the membership enjoys today. Davis Love III reminded anyone listening that the FedEx Cup has been rebuilt repeatedly since he helped create it, so nothing announced in June is carved into stone. Maverick McNeely, who sat inside the committee process, identified rest between tournaments and the freedom to construct a personal schedule as the concerns players pushed hardest in private. Yet the loudest question remains unanswered, and it concerns the men nobody televises. How does a professional actually climb this ladder? Card allocation at every level below the Challenger Series has not been determined. A tour spokesman confirmed the Corn Ferry Tour remains a vital part of the business, while acknowledging that its future shape gets discussed in coming months, adding that everything is on the table. The strategic alliance with the DP World Tour, first struck in 2020 and extended since, expires in 2027, 12 months before the new model begins. Rolapp and Guy Kinnings both declined to confirm an extension, describing the work as ongoing. Venues for the reimagined Tour Championship, which introduces match play across a rotation of prestigious courses, have not been named, which returns us to Royal Birkdale on July 15th, and to the sentence that should genuinely alarm anyone who cares about who governs this sport. Mark Darbin, chief executive of the R&A, told reporters ahead of the Open Championship that model local rules are being examined again. He described transparent dialogue with the tours and, more recently, with players themselves. Not everyone had aligned behind the December 2023 decision, he conceded, so exploring alternatives seemed only responsible. Then came the line that mattered. There has clearly been a change in the position of the PGA Tour and its players, an openness to look at some model local rules. Understand what such a rule would create. Model local rules have existed for generations, covering preferred lies and boundary stakes and temporary conditions, and in 2022, the governing bodies used one to cap driver length at 46 inches. The version now back under discussion is far more ambitious. Elite competition would mandate equipment tested to stricter standards, while everything in your bag stays legal. Research already exists on reducing the spring-like effect of drivers and setting lower limits on forgiveness. Manufacturers would need to build and stock a second category of product that no consumer ever buys. Somebody would also have to decide where the boundary falls, since the Corn Ferry Tour would presumably be included, though the position of PGA Tour champions college golf and the LPGA remains entirely open. 3 years of study, consultation, and public commitment have brought golf back to the fork it stood at in 2023. The difference is who holds the map now. Consider the surrounding landscape. LIV. Golf lost its patron in April, when Saudi Arabia's public investment fund confirmed it would finance the league only through the end of the 2026 season after investing beyond $5 billion. Yasir Al-Rumayyan vacated the chairmanship. An independent board took over, a capital raise went to market, and reporting through June indicated that a fraction of the money required to finish the current season had actually arrived. Rolapp, meanwhile, has walked broadcast partners through his restructured product ahead of a media rights negotiation he intends to run on his own timetable rather than the NFL's. A rival league fights for survival. Meanwhile, the sports rulemakers have reopened a settled question because the tour's stance moved, and the executive at the center of both storylines takes the commissioner's chair in January. No memo announced a takeover this summer. None was required. If this breakdown gave you something the broadcast coverage skipped, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next 12 months decide whether golf is governed by its oldest institutions or by a former television executive from Ponte Vedra Beach. Drop a comment below with your verdict on 90 protected cards, since that single number will define more careers than anything else announced this summer. We will be tracking every development as it lands.